They told me insulin was simple. Take what you need, eat, repeat. But nobody warned me about this timing trick, the trick that completely changed my blood sugars. See, I used to blame carbs. I used to blame stress. I even blamed my body. But the truth is that insulin wasn't the problem. My timing was. When I figured that out, everything changed. In this video, I'll show you 3 things. The moment I realized timing mattered more than the insulin that I take itself, what no one tells you about fat, fiber, and slow insulin absorption, and the exact strategy I now teach every single client who's stuck in that spike crash cycle. If you've never nailed your carb count, dosed exactly what your insulin to carb ratio told you, ate your meal, and you still ended up with numbers that looked like a roller coaster, this video is going to change everything. So stay with me to the end, because I'll give you one experiment you can try on your very next meal that could flatten your blood sugars immediately. Now, if you don't know who I am, my name is Matt Vandevecht. I'm a T1D expert, certified master fitness trainer and nutritionist, best-selling author, and Ironman athlete. And this is the insulin timing framework that I use personally and with every client to flatten the spikes without giving up the foods you love. Which, I mean, if you can wrap your head around that, like have the fun foods, the pizza, we will talk about that today, the burgers, the pasta, whatever's on your list, without having the spike. Now, let me paint a picture for you with an all too familiar story. Breakfast, I wake up, I check my CGM, looks good, right? I measure my oats, my fruit, my peanut butter. I used to have oatmeal for breakfast, it was good. I calculate the carbs, I bolus exactly what my pump says. I sit down to eat feeling confident, and then 30 minutes later, bam, spiking. 2 hours later, I'm crashing. By lunch, I'm feeling frustrated, exhausted, and blaming myself. Does that sound familiar? See, that spike, crash, correction, repeat. It felt like my body was broken. And honestly, my endo supported that thought by telling me, oh, that's just how diabetes is. But what if I told you it wasn't the carbs or diabetes as a default? It wasn't my stress. It wasn't even my body. It was the timing. And I'm going to show you exactly how I learned that lesson. Yeah, I'll never forget this one day. I ate the same breakfast I always do. Same meal, same doses, same routine, right? But here's the difference. I got distracted before eating. So my insulin had a 15-minute head start. You can probably guess what happened. My CGM curve was flat. Completely different result from the standard spike to 400 that I was used to. That was the first time that it clicked. See, it wasn't about how much insulin I was taking. It's about when I was taking it. And that started me down a rabbit hole of research, self-experimentation, and now, years later, coaching thousands of T1D clients and writing a #1 best-selling book called The Blood Sugar Freedom Formula to master that same framework. But see, here's the science that most doctors never take time to explain, or unfortunately, don't even know about, right? #1 is that insulin has an onset and a peak we need to be very aware of. It doesn't just work at the same rate all the time, right? So even the so-called rapid-acting insulins are not instant. In fact, there's only one type of insulin that works almost instantly, called Afrezza. It's an inhalable insulin. We've also got Liumjeb and Fiasp, which are insulins that they call ultra-fast-acting, which means it's a little bit faster than Humalog and Novolog, which are the standard insulins that most of us take and put in our insulin pump. Myself, I'm taking Humalog currently. If you're on injections, you might be on different types of insulins for long-acting as well, like Lantus, Basaglar, Tresiba. But point is, insulin is not instant. So they do actually take about 10 to 15 minutes just to start lowering glucose, assuming, of course, you're not on the first one that I mentioned called Afrezza. That one, that's pretty quick. That actually is close to instant. It's an inhalable insulin. So it gets into your lungs, into your alveoli, and that absorbs much faster than an injection into subcutaneous tissue, which is our fat, right? It takes longer to absorb in that sense. But, 10 to 15 minutes. It's not instant, which means we oftentimes have to give our insulin a bit of a head start from when we want it to start working. So the onset of insulin being 10 to 15 minutes, and then the peak, your insulin doesn't peak until 60 to 90 minutes later, meaning you take your insulin and it slowly builds up its effectiveness. And at 60 to 90 minutes, an hour or an hour and a half later, it is then most effective. And then it kind of tapers off over the next hour or two, right? It's crazy. So no one ever talks about this. Now, at #2, things that nobody talks about is carb absorption speed. So carbs, especially refined carbs like bread, rice, soda, if you're still drinking that, it can start hitting your bloodstream in as little as 5 minutes, which is great for a low treatment, right? So if you have a low blood sugar, great, use it. Get yourself out of the low blood sugar. But if you're trying to eat it as a meal, it takes a different strategy. You can't just dose and eat if you're going to have plain rice with nothing else, right? So imagine this, your food is sprinting full speed into your bloodstream, right? Meanwhile, your insulin is still tying its shoes. Like it's still getting ready. It hasn't even started walking yet, right? And your food's already sprinting. You need to give your insulin a head start, let it finish tying its shoes first, get up to speed, and then you can introduce those higher fast-acting carbs, right? If you're going to have them. But even if you're not having fast-acting carbs, we want to consider the other macronutrients as well, right? So number 3, things that nobody talks about, the fat and fiber factor. And we might as well add in protein as well here, but fat and fiber slow down digestion. Fat specifically delays gastric emptying. So your stomach contents slow down in their emptying to the small intestine, which means it's slower to hit your blood sugars or your bloodstream, which would impact your blood sugars, right? It's a whole process. Digestion is actually pretty cool. It's complicated, but it's cool. So when we think about the fat and the fiber, you can add fat or fiber to the meal, like pizza, as carbs and fat, right? And depending on your toppings, maybe some fiber and protein. Think about burritos, burgers, right? A nice blend of carbs in the buns, plus the fats and proteins in the burger itself. You think about a Southwest salad, right? You've got some corn, but you've also got some black beans, maybe some quinoa thrown in there with the fiber of the lettuce and the spinach. It slows it down, and then your digestion is slowed down, which means your insulin has a chance to catch up, finish tying its shoes, and actually get moving, right? So the type of food that you're looking at heavily impacts this scenario, heavily impacts the strategy required. So if I wanted to have a fruit smoothie, I'm going to have to give insulin even more of a head start, and I probably want to drink it very slowly. Okay? I used to actually make a gallon-sized smoothie. And keep in mind, this is when I was trying to bulk and put weight on, but I made a smoothie that was like 1,500 calories. It was absolutely wild. It tasted like cement because I would also put oats in there and peanut butter and butter. I don't recommend it as a recipe, but it worked. Like I put muscle on, it was great. But when you have these different options, carbs, fats, proteins, fibers, if you balance them out, it does help more, which then the carbs digest more slowly when you have those present, right? Sometimes it can take 2 to 4 hours for those carbs to fully hit when you have higher fat, right? Which means your insulin can actually peak too early if you take all of it up front and then you spike later when the insulin's already fading. So while it may peak at 60 to 90 minutes, remember the effectiveness goes down after that point. So if your food isn't fully digesting until 2 to 4 hours later, that means you might look either perfect for the first 2 hours and then spike, or worst case scenario, and this happens most often with type 1s like us, with pizza, is that you take your dose, you go low first after eating the pizza, then you have to treat the low because you're low, and you come back up, and then like an hour or 2 later, it spikes with a vengeance. That's the challenge with pizza. It's because of the macronutrient blend, right? The timing is what was off. You might have had the right amount of insulin, but because you didn't time it correctly, the whole plan just went to crap, right? And again, and it's like with pizza specifically, it's such a nightmare for type 1s, and it's not because it's bad, it's because the timing mismatch is brutal, right? So number 4, the last piece of this, the hormone wildcards, right? So stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline, they can delay insulin effectiveness even further. So you ever notice how the same meal looks totally different on your CGM when you're stressed or when you're calm? That's why, right? It can put you in a more insulin resistant state, which makes this mealtime experience completely different than the one yesterday, right? Same breakfast on Sunday when you're relaxed before church versus same breakfast on Monday. I said Sunday, right? Sunday versus Monday when you're stressed for meetings at work, right? Very different. So the goal isn't just to dose correctly, right? It's about matching your insulin's action curve to your meal absorption curve, right? And how fast that insulin's going to work versus how fast this meal is going to digest. It's a game of balance. That's it. Like if we were to oversimplify this, you're just trying to balance the timing between those two variables. Obviously, the amount of insulin matters as well. You can't just take a unit if you need 10 and time it perfectly. But I do want you to consider that for a second here. If you were to take, let's say, we'll use an extreme example. And nothing in this episode is medical advice, by the way. Use your brains. I know you will. But don't be offended either, okay? That's why I wear this shirt, right? Think differently. That's what it says. We think differently about this stuff. We got to think for ourselves because a lot of times we're let down by the medical system. So we kind of have to take it into our own hands. All that to say, if you take, let's say, 10 units because you need 10 units, but don't time it properly, you might still spike to 400. How do I know that? Because I've done it. Cereal specifically. Cereal is very difficult to bolus for. Now, when you consider the timing effect, if I didn't know how much insulin to take, but I nailed the timing perfectly, I might take 5 units, not knowing if I need 10 or not. But if I get the timing perfectly, the first hour, it'll actually look good, right? Until the food completes digestion and there's just not enough insulin present. So you can actually use that as a marker. I talk about this a lot in my book, The Blood Sugar Freedom Formula. One of my favorite concepts here is timing versus volume. They're the only two things that you can adjust with your insulin. Do I take more or less insulin? And do I take it earlier or later? Right? So when I look at the timing of this, if I am perfectly stable for the first hour, that means I probably nailed my timing. But if I spike in the second hour, that means there probably just wasn't enough insulin to begin with. So that's where I might start my considerations, right? Again, not medical advice, but if you read the book, you understand that there are frameworks behind these things, and there's pieces behind your strategies that you might not even be aware of yet. So when these curves overlap, right, when you get the timing and the digestion in line, you win. When you don't, you spike, you crash, you rage bolus, you overcorrect, you spiral, right? Again, I'm saying that because I've done this. And here's the kicker. Nobody teaches this. And we haven't even gotten into what something like, recent or anticipated exercise or activity will do, both to burn additional glucose and make any insulin on board or insulin given for a meal to work faster. Whew. Diabetes is complicated. It truly is, right? But when you understand these pieces at play, you can start to manipulate blood sugars. Because if I did mess up my pre-bolus timing and I spiked to 400, I could go for a walk, drink some water, and I could bring the blood sugars down faster because going for a walk burns glucose and increases circulation of insulin. So it's going to work a lot faster than it would if I didn't go for a walk and just sat on the couch and cried to myself, right? In fact, one of my clients, let's call him Alex, was doing everything right. He was tracking, he was dosing, he was counting his carbs, and still blood sugars were a nightmare. They were unpredictable, right? And that's why he came to us for help. The breakthrough wasn't changing what he ate. It wasn't saying, oh, it's because carbs are the devil. You need to stop eating carbs. No, it was shifting his timing by 10 minutes. That's it. 10 minutes, by the way, totally arbitrary. This is different for each person and each situation. My pre-bolus changes based on that day's activity level. Like when I was training for an Ironman versus just sitting on the couch for all the time, right? As well as current blood sugar, the trend of your CGM line, your insulin on board, right? The type of food, the list goes on. It really does. It's complicated, but it's possible. And that's what I want you to understand from this is that there's a reason behind every blood sugar. It's just up to us to put our diabetes detective hats on and to get curious, to think differently, right? And this is why we also work one-on-one with type 1 clients to personalize their unique blood sugar formulas for precision control. See, within a week, his numbers flattened out. He wasn't riding the roller coaster anymore. He didn't feel like he had to give up his favorite foods either. And this is exactly what I want for you too, right? And then here's the framework that we start with each client, because there is down to the minute a pre-bolus formula where when we have all of the variables in front of us with our clients, we can line this up and say, hey, you need a 7-minute pre-bolus for breakfast. You need a 12-minute pre-bolus for lunch, right? A lot of factors at it. Like I mentioned, activity, insulin on board, trending glucose, current glucose, stress levels that day. Are you more insulin resistant or sensitive from workouts or from menstrual cycle for females? There's a lot of variables at play. But with new clients, we lay all those variables out so that we can say it's going to be 17 minutes if you want to have oatmeal and fruit, right? And that's the certainty that I'm after. I love precision control. And so when I look at new clients, the framework that we start with is fast carbs like fruit, juice, bread. Add a little extra to your pre-bolus and eat slow. Told you guys I used to make a gallon smoothie. I'm not joking either. I would sip on it slowly because it didn't taste that good. But what actually was working for me is that sipping on it slowly meant that all 1,000 to 1,500 calories of that smoothie didn't hit all at once and beat my insulin to the finish line. Instead, because I was sipping on it over the course of an hour, my insulin had a chance to finish tying its shoes, get up, do a warm up, and start jogging while I was consuming this massive smoothie, right? So for fast carbs, again, fruit, juice, bread, anything that's going to digest faster, you want to give the insulin a little bit more of a head start. Not medical advice, just helping you to think about this a little more critically, right? Now, number 2, for mixed meals, we've got proteins and carbs, maybe some fats and fibers mixed in, but it's a good blend, right? Standard pre-bolus, but keep an eye out around 90 to 120 minutes after the meal for a protein rise, right? Because protein does convert to glucose at a rate of about 30 to 50%. So you actually do have to have an insulin to protein ratio as well. If you don't know about that, check out the link in the description. We've got some trainings that might be beneficial for you to start poking around in. All right. Now, the third, it's challenging because this is honestly the default that a lot of type 1s are told to go to, which is low carb, high fat, high fiber meals, right? And if you start adding carbs in, it gets trickier. So again, the pizza equation, we've got burgers, you got pasta, mac and cheese. There's a whole lineup of delicious food just waiting to be enjoyed. Sometimes when you get that route, a split bolus or an extended bolus, if you're on a pump, might be most beneficial because again, you have some of the carbs digesting immediately, but the other carbs are getting slowed down by the fats and proteins and fibers. So you might not need the rest of the insulin until an hour or 2 or longer later, if you want to have that stable glucose line without the big spikes or the big drops, right? So part of your insulin up front, part later on to match the digestion speed. That's what we're after here, is matching the speed. It's a game of balance, right? And let me be clear, this is about experimentation. So everybody responds differently. But once you find that sweet spot, your blood sugars become predictable. Which I know sounds like a fairy tale, but it's true because predictability gives us freedom. If you know what's going to happen, you know how to execute and you can actually enjoy food again. It means that you don't have to fear food. It means you can actually enjoy life and not obsess over every single bite. And remember the 3 promises that I told you at the beginning of this video. So number 1 was the moment I realized insulin wasn't the problem, my timing was. So we covered that. The 15-minute accidental delay breakfast experiment. By the way, there was a time in my life when I was very insulin resistant. And as some of you might be too. No judgment, it's just the fact, right? And there was a time where I needed a 45-minute pre-bolus. That's nuts. and for reference, currently now, I'm very active, very healthy. I still need a 20-minute pre-bolus. So the standard doctor's orders of 10 to 15 minutes might not be serving you well. In fact, it was wrong for me on a number of occasions, okay? But understand that we're all different. I have some clients who still need 45 minutes pre-bolus. Some clients only need 5, right? It's very different for you, your body, and the context of your unique situation. So even day to day, your pre-bolus can change. When I was ramping up my training for Ironman, I needed like 5 to 10 minutes. Now that I'm not training for a race currently, it's 20, right? So there's that. Number 2, I told you guys what no one tells you about fat, fiber, and slow insulin absorption. We did break that down as well, like why pizza, burritos, and beans throw you off if you don't time it correctly. Yes, it can be helpful to delay the spike, but if you do nothing when the spike does finally arrive, you're still going to end up high. You just pushed off that frustration 2 hours into the future. Still doesn't help. You need to have a full strategy. Speaking of number 3, the strategy I teach every client stuck in that spike crash cycle. Okay, we just walked through the framework, balancing your variables, and in this case, it's your insulin action timing and digestion timing based on the food types is going to be your answer, right? So looking at what type of meal is this? What are the circumstances at play? Am I currently low and maybe I don't need to give a pre-bolus because I don't want to stay at 60, right? I might reduce my pre-bolus or remove it, or what I like to do, treat first with 5 to 10 carbs, push it up to 80, 90, or 100, and then I can pre-bolus confidently. right? There's different routes for everybody depending on your situation, but that is exactly what I'm trying to get in today, is that we are all different. Our day-to-day experiences are different. We have to be able to pivot and adapt. This is why you need a dynamic blood sugar formula. You cannot get by. Well, let me rephrase that. You can get by and just survive with diabetes if you use static rules like always 15 minutes at a pre-bolus, which is what your doctor tells you, right? Or only use 15 grams of glucose to treat a low. What if it's 69 and stable with no insulin on board and I'm sitting on the couch? I might only need 5 carbs. What if it's 69, double arrows down, and I have 10 units on board and I'm in the middle of a bike ride? I might need 50 carbs, okay? It can change dramatically. Static rules will not serve you well if your goal is to thrive with type 1 diabetes. If you want that, yes, it takes extra effort. Deal with it. These are the cards that we were dealt. I'm in the same boat. It's up to you to decide what your future with diabetes looks like. So now the question becomes, are you ready to start experimenting with your timing? Safe, obviously, right? This isn't medical advice. Set up safety nets. Do not be reckless with this. I've tried that too. It can put you in some pretty scary positions if you don't know what you're doing when you're experimenting. Personal experience. All right, I can tell you that. That's why we work with people who want that safety net of, hey, just tell me what to do and I'll do it. We have templates for that, right? Watch the training in the description, more info there. You can get a start there as well on how to start experimenting, as well as my 2-year experiment and research process. I'll lay it out for you in that training, so you can check that in the description. But here's my challenge for you. At your next meal, don't change the dose, don't cut the carbs, don't restrict yourself. Just shift your timing by a few minutes. If you've been seeing spikes, do what you think is necessary, use your brain, and take note of what happens. Still spiking? Maybe you need more timing, right? Let your personal data be your guide and take good notes. You are the scientist and the lab rat. Watch your CGM levels, watch them level out over time. Honestly, the more you pay attention to it, the more you experiment and iterate and take good notes, the better you're going to get at this. You will see the difference. And if you want the full playbook, the exact system that I use personally and teach my T1D clients every day, I put together a free training that walks through it step by step. Like I said, the link is in the description. And if you're ready to flatten spikes, break the spike crash cycle, and finally feel confident with food again, go watch that free training. And if this video gave you a moment and you want to dive deeper down the rabbit hole of insulin timing, drop the word timing in the comments so I know you're ready to take control, and I'll add it to the list to go a bit deeper in a future video. All right, and remember, it wasn't your carbs, it wasn't your stress, it wasn't your body, it was your timing and your strategy. And once you fix that, everything changes. Keep up the fight.